Hello and welcome back to the Ask an Introvert podcast. I'm Jennifer Ho, your host and life coach for introverts, helping those who feel quietened in this world develop self-leadership to take up space just as you are. This episode is part of a mini series called Catching Up in Public, where I was originally going to reflect on 4 pivotal months of my life in 2024, but now I have a couple more months to look back on. Regardless, this series serves as a dual purpose. First, to be my own self reflection, and second, to offer you insights and perspectives from my life while they're super recent and fresh on my mind. From coaching at an international summit to navigating career transitions, each episode unpacks my perspective on my life's big moments. Today, I was planning on revisiting May 2024 when I got really serious about finding a new job and ended up landing a new role in the span of a week. But we're going to dive into the job search in the next episode, number 21, instead. Why? Well, because as I was reflecting on my job search seriousness, a key theme throughout that process was moving from discomfort to decision. And based on that theme, I want to share a more recent example. And it's an example that impacts all of you, my dear listeners. So, here in episode 20, I'm going to talk about all my mind drama about the podcast in recent weeks. I want to share all of this, not to explain my absence, but to give all of you a peek into the inner workings of my brain and how I deal with feelings of discomfort and how I approach making decisions to make the hard things easier for me. And lately, taking actions in podcasting have been hard for me. I knew that I didn't want to give it up, so I had to face my resistance to it. Something was off, and I didn't want to admit that, but I did need to admit that. So, the last time I published an episode, it had been 81 days since I released the previous one. This time, it has been 41 days. I could say that that's much better, and maybe it is, but I'm not really okay with that. So, I'm far from being happy with it. I've been thinking about what my holdup is. This year, I set a goal to record and publish 24 episodes. That's two per month, and I still want that. But what's my deal? Before this one, I've only published six. So, as I tried to face all this discomfort, all this uncomfortable stuff, all this heavy stuff, all my brain wanted to do was keep me in this very comfortable space of it's okay if you don't want a podcast right now. It sounds really reassuring, right? But if I let it keep going, it says nobody expects you to show up. You set that expectation, so it's fine. Ah, maybe that's exactly one of my problems, but we'll come back to that later. I'm also very aware that anything that I put off for later will have to be dealt with by future Jennifer. It's still me. I still have to do the things I say I'll do, or I have to officially change my mind and let them go. But I knew that I couldn't let the podcast go, so I had to dig deeper to make a serious decision to sit my butt down and record and publish, which also meant understanding why I was avoiding it. So, one hypothesis from my brilliant business coach is that the Capricorn parts of me like being ahead, not catching up, which makes the whole idea of catching up on a series called Catching Up in Public misaligned with me. I didn't even think about how I was suggesting to myself that I'm behind. I really don't like that. This is a very good and valid hypothesis, but realizing that didn't solve the whole problem for me. I was still avoiding doing the thing. I didn't really want to change the name of this because I like it. But I do have to be very aware and conscious that this is about catching up with all of you on my life and all the things I haven't told you. It does not mean that I'm behind. So then I thought about all the steps it takes to make a podcast episode happen. And of course, I went straight to my SOPs. That's corporate speak for standard operating procedures, and it's very Capricorn of me. I went down the list. 1, write your outline and script in Google Docs. 2, record in Zoom. 3, edit lightly in Descript. 4, export video. 5, write description. 6, upload and schedule on Spotify for podcasters. 7, prepare social media posts. 7A, use standard template. 7B, pull standalone Jenniferisms from the episode for the template. 8, schedule carousel on social. 8A, use PDF document for LinkedIn. 8B, use PNG files for Instagram. Post on at Ask an Introvert podcast and invite at by Jennifer Ho as a collaborator. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, right? I didn't really feel any particular resistance to any of that. So, what was really bothering me? Besides this official list on my document, I also had these implement later steps. And I realized that there was a voice in my head that was distracting myself and low-key pressuring myself to implement these now. So I needed to make later much more clear. And these implement later steps were upload and schedule on YouTube, publish on website for SEO, use this link in social, schedule standalone quotes out 1, 2, 3 months later, schedule email about the podcast. This felt overwhelming. So to firm up my decision not to add those steps now, I deleted them from my SOPs. I let them go because I didn't need them taking up space anymore. Then I went back and I took a closer at the existing steps. And I realized that when it comes to the recording part, recording with video made me feel a big too. Since moving into a fully remote job on top of running an online business, I rarely find myself camera ready. For meetings, it was whatever, but for recording on this podcast, I do want to put in some effort. But I had found myself in moments where I would sit down and I'd be like, okay, time to record. And then camera turns on and I'm like, ew, I don't like how I look. But I would try to be efficient and force myself to record like that. Yeah, that doesn't work. I do want to put in some effort. So here I am with freshly washed hair. And with that, I had a list that looked doable over the course of 1 to 2 days instead of one that sent me into overwhelm and made me avoid everything. So, new personal standard unlocked. My to-do list and SOPs can be underwhelming. I want them to be underwhelming so they're reasonable, they're doable, they're easy. But that wasn't the end of it. I sat down and thought about what rules I was making up about podcasting or about my podcast that were making me feel iffy about it. My business coach also posed another question. Who do you think you would be disappointing if you didn't make any new episodes? Ugh. My first thought was that I would disappoint all of you. I've started this thing and I've said more episodes are coming, yet there are no new episodes. I've been avoiding making them. I think I would also disappoint myself. But then I realized I've already been disappointing myself. Yeah, I really have. I've released 19 episodes overall, and none of them have really realized the original vision of the Ask an Introvert podcast, except for episode 5, which was a Q&A format. My original vision for this podcast is to have advice column vibes. I know I've mentioned it before, literally ask an introvert, but I hadn't put anything in place for the pod to have these vibes, but now I have. So when we get to the job search recap in the next episode, it will be a Q&A format. And at the end of this episode, I'll also share how you can contribute to the podcast by asking me for my advice. Okay, now the last decision I've made about this podcast is really a decision about my identity. When I started out, I was a beginner, so I made it easier on myself by allowing inconsistency. Now that I'm no longer a beginner, that inconsistency has become a habit that has made me pretty casual, pretty laissez-faire about the podcast. And I don't want to be an inconsistent or a casual or a laissez-faire podcaster. This podcast is a very important part to sharing my thought leadership, my life stories, and my personal perspectives with all of you. I want to be serious about this. Of the 24 episodes I want to make this year, so far I've published 7, including this one. That means I have to release 17 more to meet my goal. Well, there are also roughly 17 weeks left in 2024, and as of today, Monday, August 26th, I'm making a decision to publish at least 1 episode a week for the rest of the year. Some rules I'm throwing out the window to make this easier for myself. If I'm not ready for the video recording, audio only, that's okay. If I am holding back from publishing because I have to edit something, do I really have to edit it? Can I just let it go public? I also think, initially I was like, oh, 10-minute episodes, I'm allowed to do that. But somehow my initial episodes were pretty long. And so I started setting this rule that I had to have 20-minute episodes. I'm throwing that out the window too. I might show up for 2 minutes one week, and that will be enough. That will count. So through all of this, through thinking about it, through getting coached on it, through journaling on it, and through making these decisions, I realized that what actually served me in starting this podcast was making things simple, like choosing not to have music, or like immediately just going with Spotify for podcasters because it was free instead of researching all the platforms. I really allowed myself to focus on building the skill of podcasting instead of applying the skills of post-production or figuring out logistics or adding these extra things. I kept it simple and I kept it moving. And all along, what got me here was doing that. I made things simple and easy for myself. It wasn't actually about allowing inconsistency after all. It was about intentionally making things simple and easy. That's what got me here. So, as you can see, as we traveled through the things that my brain was feeding me and how I made some decisions and how I had various realizations, that's how deep I have to dig into my uncomfortable feelings to go from discomfort to decisions that actually push me into action. And if any of that resonated with you, if you want to get better at making decisions for yourself, it's something we can work on together in one-on-one coaching. You can book a complimentary discovery call with me to see if Take Root into Self-Leadership, my signature coaching program, would be a good fit for you. The discovery calls focus on you and is for you. No matter what you decide, I'll honor your decision, and you will at least walk away having decided if you'll work with me or not. And that will be a huge lift off of you. The link to book the call is in the show notes. Okay, now next episode, I promise we're really diving into the job search. The questions I'll be answering have been sourced from conversations that I've had with clients, friends, and family in real life. This is me putting my decision to have advice column vibes on this podcast into action. And on top of everything I mentioned, you might also find me simplifying things further. Perhaps I won't have a photo on the cover of the podcast post template, or perhaps I'll stop introducing myself in the intro. I don't know, but whatever I feel resistance to, I'm going to let it go so that I can do the harder, more important thing of putting out the podcast. So you can think on this for yourself too, about anything that's not naturally coming easily to you. When it's not coming easily to you, how can you change the parts that you have control over to make it easier, to make it lighter? Not the parts you can't control. If you list those down, cross them off immediately when you journal on this question. Okay, that's it for today. If you have something you want to ask me and get my thoughts on through the podcast, send me a DM on Instagram or submit it anonymously at byjenniferho.com/askanintrovert. This link is also in the show notes. I will be back in a week or less. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode. I can't wait to talk to you then.